Something has already shifted, and the strange part is, it didn't announce itself. There was no moment you could point to, no clear line where everything changed. But if you're honest, you can feel it. The way certain things no longer pull you the same way. The way conversations that once held your attention now feel empty. The way your reactions have slowed down, almost like something inside you is no longer available to respond the way it used to. This isn't distance. This isn't a disconnection. This is a quiet form of elevation. And what you're experiencing right now is not something you are trying to become. It's something you have already entered. You're not approaching a new state. You're stabilizing inside it. And that's why something very specific is happening. You are now beyond reach. Phase Action 1. Your internal access has changed. What has changed within you is not something loud or dramatic, and that is why it can be difficult to explain to yourself or to others. It did not arrive with a clear signal or a defined moment. It developed quietly, almost unnoticed, while you were living your normal life. But if you observe carefully, you can recognize that the way things interact with you is no longer the same. Earlier, everything had a direct path into your inner space. Words carried weight immediately. Other people's emotions could influence your state without resistance. Situations would stay in your mind long after they had passed, repeating themselves and shaping how you felt. It was not something you consciously allowed. It was simply how your system operated. You were open, but not in a controlled way. While you absorbed without filtering, and that made you responsive to almost everything around you. Now there is a shift that is subtle but powerful. The openness is no longer uncontrolled. It has taken on a different form, one that includes awareness. You are still able to see, hear, and understand everything around you. But there is a boundary that did not exist before. It is not something you built through effort, and it is not something you maintain through constant thinking. It is simply there, functioning in the background. When something reaches you now, it does not immediately become part of your internal state. It is noticed, but it is not automatically accepted. This creates a separation between what happens around you and what happens within you. This is why you may feel like certain things have lost their impact, while conversations that once pulled you in completely now pass by without holding your attention in the same way. Situations that would have stayed in your mind for hours or days now fade much faster. Even when something is intense or emotionally charged, it does not anchor itself inside you like it used to. You are aware of it, but you are not carrying it. That difference may seem small, but it changes everything. It means that your inner space is no longer available for everything that tries to enter it. This change also affects how quickly you move from experience to reaction. Before, there was almost no space between the two. Something happened, and you were already responding. Now there is a moment in between, a pause, that gives you the ability to observe before you engage. In that pause, you are no longer controlled by what arrives. You are deciding what continues. That decision is not always conscious, but it is present. It reflects a deeper stability that is forming within you. Because of this, many things that once depended on your immediate response begin to lose their influence. External pressure does not create the same urgency. Expectations do not carry the same weight. Even internal thoughts that used to repeat and build intensity now pass without forming the same patterns. It is not that these things have disappeared. They still exist, but they no longer have the same level of permission to stay within you. Your system has changed the way it processes them. It is important to understand that this is not withdrawal, and it is not disconnection. You are not becoming distant from life. In fact, that you may be noticing more than before. The difference is that awareness is no longer tied to absorption. You can experience something without becoming part of it. You can understand without carrying. You can see clearly without being pulled into every detail. This creates a sense of lightness that may feel unfamiliar at first, because you are used to holding more than you needed to. As this continues, your internal space becomes more defined. It is no longer shaped by everything that enters it, but by what you allow to remain. This does not require constant effort or control. It is a natural outcome of the shift that has already taken place. Your system has adjusted its boundaries in a way that protects your stability without limiting your awareness. And because of that, what once had easy access to you now finds no place to settle. This is why the effect of external influences begins to weaken. They can still approach, but they cannot stay. They can still appear, but they cannot take hold. Over time, this creates a new way of moving through life, one where your inner state is not constantly shaped by what surrounds you, but maintained by something deeper and more stable within you. And once this kind of internal access changes, everything that relied on reaching you begins to lose its power, not because you pushed it away, but because it no longer has a place to exist inside you. Section 2. Reaction is no longer automatic. There was a phase in your life when everything happened quickly inside you. An event would occur, and before you could even recognize it clearly, you were already reacting. A word, a tone, a situation. Each one had immediate access to your emotions. It wasn't something you planned or decided. It was simply how your system operated. The response came first, and understanding followed later. You would find yourself thinking, speaking, or feeling intensely, and only afterward would you realize how deeply you had been pulled into something that may not have deserved that level of involvement. It felt natural at the time, but it also meant that your inner state was constantly being shaped by what was happening around you. Now, something has shifted in a very quiet but meaningful way. The speed at which you respond has changed. There is no longer an instant movement from stimulus to reaction. Instead, there is a small but significant space in between. It may be brief, almost unnoticeable at first, but it is there. In that space, your awareness becomes active before your response does. When you begin to see what is happening without immediately becoming part of it. This is not hesitation or confusion. It is clarity forming before action. Inside this gap, you are no longer being carried by the moment. You are present within it. You can observe the tone of a conversation, the intention behind someone's words, or the emotional weight of a situation without instantly absorbing it. This changes your relationship with everything around you. Instead of being moved by each experience, you begin to understand it first. And that understanding creates a different kind of response. One that is not driven by impulse, but guided by awareness. This does not mean that you have stopped feeling. Your emotions are still there, and your ability to sense what is happening around you has not disappeared. In fact, it may have become sharper, for the difference is that feeling is no longer the same as reacting. You can recognize an emotion without letting it take control of your behavior. You can notice tension without immediately responding to it. You can hear something that once would have triggered you, and instead of being pulled into it, you remain steady. This is not suppression. It is separation between awareness and automatic action. You begin to notice that situations which once escalated quickly now lose their intensity. Conflicts do not build the same way. Conversations do not carry the same emotional weight. That even internal thoughts that used to spiral now pass through without gaining momentum. This happens because the reaction is no longer feeding them. Without that immediate response, many things simply lose the energy they once relied on to continue. This shift also changes how others experience you. When your reactions were predictable, people and situations could easily influence you. Certain words would produce certain responses, and patterns would repeat themselves because they had a reliable outcome. But now, that predictability is gone. The same inputs no longer create the same outputs. This makes it difficult for anything to control or direct your state, because there is no longer a guaranteed reaction waiting to be triggered. What once worked no longer does, and that alone changes the dynamic completely. It is important to understand that you did not achieve this by forcing yourself to resist everything. You did not build a wall or try to block out the world. What changed is much deeper than that. Your system simply stopped operating on automatic response. Or you are no longer moving in direct reaction to what happens. You are responding from a place that is not immediately affected. That is why it feels natural rather than forced. You are not holding yourself back. You are simply no longer being pushed forward by every external influence. This creates a strong sense of stability. Your state is no longer shifting constantly based on what is happening around you. It holds its position more consistently. You are able to remain steady, even when things around you are changing. This steadiness is not rigid. It is flexible, but it is not easily disturbed. It allows you to move through situations without losing your center, and to engage without becoming overwhelmed. This is where control returns, but not in the way it is usually understood. It is not about controlling everything outside of you. It is about not being controlled by it. When your reactions are no longer automatic, nothing can easily take hold of your attention, your emotions, or your direction without your awareness being involved. And when awareness is present, influence weakens. As a result, many of the forces that once affected you begin to lose their impact. They can still exist, but they cannot move you in the same way. They no longer have a direct path into your behavior, and without that path, they cannot shape your experience as easily as before. This is not something you actively defend against. It is simply a result of how your system now functions. You are no longer reacting by default. You are present before you respond. And in that presence, something important has changed. You are no longer available to be pulled in every direction. Instead, for you move with intention, even in the smallest ways. And that quiet shift is what gives you a level of control that does not need to be expressed loudly to be real. Section 3. Your presence now disrupts old patterns. There is something about your presence now that people can sense, even if they cannot explain it. It is not something you are trying to display. and it is not something you are forcing. It shows up quietly, in the way you sit, the way you listen, and the way you respond, or choose not to respond. You are not louder than before, not more expressive, not trying to prove anything. But there is a steadiness in you that was not there in the same way before. And that steadiness begins to change how everything around you behaves. Earlier, many interactions followed familiar patterns. People knew how to approach you, on what kind of response to expect, and how certain situations would unfold. There was a rhythm to it. Certain words would lead to certain emotions. Certain behaviors would lead to predictable reactions. It created a cycle that repeated itself without much variation. Even if you were not aware of it, you were part of that pattern, and your responses helped keep it active. Now that pattern is being interrupted. The same inputs no longer create the same outputs. Someone may say something expecting a reaction, but the reaction does not come in the way it used to. A situation may develop that would have once pulled you in, but now it meets a different kind of response. Calm, measured, or sometimes no response at all. This breaks the rhythm that others were used to, and when a pattern is broken, it becomes visible. Stability has a unique effect. It reveals what is unstable. When you remain steady, the inconsistency in others becomes more noticeable, not because you are pointing it out, but because it no longer blends with your state. Before, when everything was moving at the same pace, it was harder to see the difference. Now, your steadiness creates contrast, and contrast brings clarity. This is where discomfort begins to appear in others, not because you are doing something to them, but because the environment has changed. They may feel that something is different in how you respond, even if they cannot describe it clearly. The ways they once connected with you may no longer work the same way. Attempts to pull you into certain conversations or emotional states may not have the same effect. And because those patterns no longer produce familiar results, it creates a sense of imbalance for them. It is important to understand that this is not about you changing who they are. You are not altering their behavior directly. What is changing is your participation. You are no longer engaging in the same emotional exchanges, the same repetitive cycles, or the same dynamics that once defined your interactions. And without your participation, those patterns lose one of their key elements. Patterns are not sustained by one person alone. They require a certain kind of response to continue. When that response is no longer present, the pattern cannot maintain itself in the same way. It begins to weaken, and in many cases, it simply stops. This can feel confusing to those who were used to it, because what once felt stable now feels uncertain. Some may try to reestablish the old dynamic. They may repeat behaviors that used to work, expecting the same outcome. But when they encounter a different response, or no response at all, it becomes clear that something has changed. This is where resistance can appear, not necessarily in a direct or obvious way, but in subtle forms: confusion, frustration, or attempts to draw you back into what was familiar. This is not a conflict. There is no direct opposition or struggle taking place. What is happening is a natural separation between two different states. You are no longer aligned with the patterns that once connected you. And because alignment is no longer there, the interaction changes. It is not about winning or losing, right or wrong. It is about compatibility. Incompatibility does not always mean distance in a physical sense. You may still be present in the same spaces, and around the same people, in the same situations. But the way you engage is different. You are not feeding the same cycles. You are not reinforcing the same behaviors. And because of that, the overall dynamic shifts. This shift may feel unfamiliar at first. You may notice that certain interactions become quieter, shorter, or less intense. Some connections may feel like they are changing form. Others may gradually fade. This is not something you need to force or manage. It is a natural outcome of the change that has already taken place within you. As your presence continues to stabilize, it begins to set a different tone. Not through effort, but through consistency. You are no longer adjusting yourself to match every situation. Instead, situations begin to adjust around the steadiness you carry. This does not mean everything changes immediately, but over time, the influence of your stability becomes more noticeable. What once required effort to manage now resolves itself more easily. Interactions become simpler because there is less emotional complexity being added. Situations that once felt heavy now pass without the same weight, and patterns that depended on your involvement no longer find the same support. This is the result of becoming someone who is not easily pulled into every dynamic. You are still present, still aware, still engaged, but not in a way that allows every pattern to continue through you. Your presence is no longer neutral in the sense of blending into everything. It is stable, and that stability naturally changes the environment around you. You do not need to announce this change or explain it. It is already being expressed through how you exist in each moment. And as this continues, the patterns that once defined your interactions will either adapt to this new stability, or they will no longer remain. Section 4. Your energy is no longer available on demand. There was a time when your energy moved outward without much pause. If something called for your attention, you responded. If someone reached out, you engaged. If a situation appeared, you gave your time, your focus, and often your emotional involvement without thinking twice. It was not always a conscious decision. It was simply how you operated. You were accessible in a way that felt natural, but it also meant that your energy was constantly being distributed in many directions at once. You showed up fully, even in places that did not require that level of presence. Now, something has shifted in how your energy is given. It is not that you have less of it, and it is not that you have become distant or unwilling. The change is in how it is accessed. Your energy no longer responds automatically to every demand. There is a natural pause before you engage, a quiet evaluation that happens without effort. You do not move just because something appears in front of you. You do not respond just because something asks. This creates a different relationship between you and the world around you. You may notice that you no longer feel the same urgency to reply, to explain, or to involve yourself in everything. Messages can wait. Conversations do not need to be extended. Situations do not require immediate emotional investment. This is not neglect or avoidance. It is clarity about what actually deserves your energy. Before, everything had a similar level of access. Now that access is limited in a way that feels natural rather than forced. This limitation is not built on resistance. You are not trying to block anything out or push anything away. Instead, your system has become more precise. It recognizes where your energy is needed and where it is not. When something aligns with your state, engagement feels smooth and effortless. When it does not, there is no internal push to participate. You simply remain where you are, without feeling the need to move toward it. Because of this, others may begin to notice a difference in how you respond. The availability they once experienced is no longer the same. You are not as quick to give your attention, not as easy to draw into conversations or situations that do not align with you. This can feel unfamiliar to those who were used to a different version of you. They may interpret it in different ways, but the reality is simple. Your energy is no longer open to everything. This shift also changes how you experience your own state. When your energy is not constantly being pulled in multiple directions, it remains more stable. You feel less drained, less scattered, and more present in what you are actually doing. Your focus becomes clearer because it is not divided unnecessarily. You are able to give more depth to fewer things, rather than spreading yourself across many. This does not mean you have become restricted or limited. In fact, it is the opposite. By not giving your energy everywhere, you allow it to be stronger where it is placed. When you choose to engage, you do so fully, without distraction. And your presence becomes more intentional, and that intention carries more weight than constant availability ever could. There is also a deeper change happening in how you relate to expectations. Before, there may have been a sense that you needed to respond, needed to be available, needed to meet certain demands. Now that pressure has less influence. You are no longer operating from a place where every expectation requires your attention. You recognize that not everything needs to be answered, and not everything needs your involvement. This recognition creates a sense of freedom. You are no longer tied to every request or every situation that appears. You are able to choose where your energy goes without feeling pulled or obligated. This choice is not always a deliberate thought. It is often a natural response that comes from your current state. You simply move toward what aligns and remain unaffected by what does not. This changes how others interact with you. They begin to understand, even without explanation, that your energy is not something that can be accessed at any moment. It requires a certain level of alignment, a certain kind of interaction that matches your current state. Without that, engagement does not happen in the same way. This is not something you need to enforce. It is not a rule you are applying, or a boundary you are constantly maintaining. It is the result of a shift that has already taken place within you. Your system has adjusted how it gives and receives energy, and that adjustment naturally limits what can reach you. Your experience becomes more focused and more stable. You are not constantly moving in response to everything around you. Instead, you remain centered, allowing only what is relevant to engage with you. This does not isolate you from life. It refines your connection to it. Your energy is still present, still available, but not in the way it once was. It is no longer something that responds to every call. It is something that moves with intention, guided by alignment rather than demand. And because of that, what once had easy access to you now finds that it cannot reach you in the same way. Section 5. Being beyond reach is not distance, it's alignment. This shift can feel like you have moved away from things, There may be moments where your surroundings seem slightly unfamiliar, even though nothing on the surface has changed. Conversations feel quieter, interactions feel lighter, and certain environments no longer hold the same pull. It can create the impression that you have become distant, as if there is space between you and what once felt normal. But what is actually happening is not distance. It is alignment. Distance suggests separation, as if you have stepped away from life or disconnected from people and experiences. Alignment, on the other hand, is not about moving away. It is about being positioned correctly. You are not further from life. You are simply no longer standing in places that require you to constantly adjust, react, or absorb everything around you. Your position has changed internally, and that change is now reflected in how you experience everything externally. Before, much of your interaction with the world depended on adapting, how you would adjust your energy, your responses, and sometimes even your focus to match what was happening around you. This created a sense of involvement, but it also meant that your state was constantly shifting. You were participating in many things at once, even when they did not fully align with you. That is why everything felt more intense, more demanding, and sometimes more draining. Now that constant adjustment is no longer taking place. You are not matching every situation or every person in the same way. Instead, you remain consistent within yourself, and things either meet you at that level, or they do not engage with you fully. This creates a very different experience. It may feel quieter, but it is also more stable. You are not pulled into every interaction, and you are not required to respond to everything that appears. This is where the idea of being beyond reach becomes clear. It is not that you are unavailable to everything. It is that you are no longer available to what does not align with your current state. There is a difference between avoiding something and simply not being affected by it. Avoidance requires effort. Alignment does not. When you are aligned, things that do not match you naturally pass without creating an impact. You may notice this in small, everyday moments. Situations that once would have captured your attention now move past you without holding it. Conversations that would have drawn you in no longer create the same level of engagement. Even your own thoughts may feel different, less repetitive, less intense, more neutral. This is not because those things have disappeared, but because your position relative to them has changed. Alignment also brings a sense of clarity that was harder to access before. When you are not constantly adjusting to everything around you, it becomes easier to recognize what actually fits your direction. Decisions feel simpler because they are not influenced by every external factor. You are not weighing every option based on how it might affect others or how it might be perceived. Instead, there is a natural understanding of what aligns and what does not. This does not make you rigid or closed. You are still open to new experiences, still able to connect, still able to engage. The difference is that your openness is now guided rather than uncontrolled. You are not stepping into everything. You are allowing what matches your state to meet you where you are. This creates interactions that feel more natural and less forced. As this alignment becomes more consistent, your experience of life begins to change in a noticeable way. There is less internal conflict, less need to manage your reactions, and less effort required to maintain your state. You are not constantly correcting yourself or trying to return to balance. because you're already operating from it. This creates a sense of ease that may feel unfamiliar at first, but it becomes more natural over time. Others may interpret this shift differently. Some may feel that you are less available, less involved, or less responsive. But what they are actually sensing is the absence of the patterns that once connected you. You are no longer engaging in the same way, and without that familiar interaction, it can appear as distance. In reality, you are still present. You are simply not participating in what no longer aligns with you. It is important to recognize that this alignment is not something you need to maintain through effort. It is the result of changes that have already taken place within you. Your system has adjusted how it responds, how it engages, and how it holds its state. As a result, your position within your own experience has become more stable. Being beyond reach in this sense is not about withdrawing or isolating yourself. It is about existing in a way where only what is compatible with your state can fully connect with you. Everything else remains external, without disrupting your internal balance. This allows you to move through life with awareness and presence, but without being entangled in every part of it. This creates a new kind of relationship with everything around you. You are still part of the same world, still experiencing the same environments, but your interaction with them is different. You are no longer shaped by everything you encounter. Instead, you remain consistent, allowing your alignment to determine what becomes part of your experience. The sense of distance fades, replaced by something more stable and more grounded. You begin to recognize that you have not stepped away from life. You have simply stepped into a position where life no longer moves you in every direction. You are present, aware, and steady, allowing only what truly aligns to meet you fully. So if you've been noticing this shift, this quiet change in how you respond, how you feel, how you move through things, understand this clearly. You didn't lose connection, that you didn't become distant. You became precise. What used to reach you no longer can, not because you blocked it, but because you are no longer positioned where it can find you. And once that position changes, everything else follows. You don't need to prove it. You don't need to explain it. You simply continue as you are, steady, aware, and unavailable to what cannot meet you. Because this is not something you are building anymore. This is something you are already living.